Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve Bisa. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight-to-the-point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to episode 46 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Bisa. If you haven't listened to episode 45 yet, please do so. Morgan Beard was so open and honest about her own life, her own treatment, her coaching, and particularly her music. And I loved her music. I've listened to a couple of songs already. The third song just came out. So I hope you get a chance to listen to her music. But episode 46 will be with someone I met through Instagram years ago. And I want to say it was 2019. And we always exchanged, we always got along, and we decided to do a podcast together. So Gina Moffa is an LCSW in New York City. She's a psychotherapist for over 18 years, and she specializes on the many faces of grief and loss. Gina also focuses on helping people navigate uncertain, complicated life transitions. And most recently, she's working on a book to modernize grief and empower those going through the grief process. I'm looking forward to having that conversation about the book. Obviously, you guys know about my book, but really want to hear about that and obviously to work with the grief and loss. So here's the interview. Hi, and welcome to episode 48 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm Steve Bisa. I'm sitting here with someone that I feel like I've known for about 3 years. However, I've never actually talked to her until today, pre-interview and right now. And it's always fun to meet someone in this way, even though it's also nerve-wracking because you kind of like want to get to know them, but you don't want to you don't want to break any kind of like barriers or anything. So it's just weird sometimes, even for me. So Gina Moffa is a therapist in New York City, and she's been practicing for several years. I don't remember off the top of my head, but Gina, welcome.
Hi, Steve. Nice to be here with you. It does feel like we've talked for a million years, but never face to face.
I was scrolling through our direct messaging on Instagram, and I'm like, it goes back to like 2019 that we've liked our posts or what have you. And I'm like, wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, actually, I thought it was even longer than that because I don't know. I'll go back and see, but it's especially through the pandemic. I think it's so nice. I think we got to know each other more during the pandemic, talking more and, sharing each other's posts and stuff like that. And I think that time really helped us form a community that we all sort of needed. So I'm so grateful to Instagram for bringing us together.
I usually have an order for my questions. I kind of do it almost the same every podcast. I'm going to jump to a different thing. Didn't we need other therapists to kind of commiserate during this hard time during the pandemic? I'm just going to throw that out right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We needed it more than ever. I think just to normalize, but also to support each other. And I think we still do. I don't think we've come out of it. I think the need and the mental health crisis is just snowballing still. And I think we need each other more than ever. And I am so entirely grateful for Instagram because honestly, without Instagram and without meeting amazing other therapists, I think, like you and a few others, I think I would have really feel like I would have lost my own mind, feeling so isolated during this time.
And I think that that's what the general population felt. And then not to take away from any other professions, I can only talk about mine intelligently. We were so like holding space for other people while we're still going through a pandemic ourselves. And I think that brought a dynamic that's pretty unique for pretty much a lot of professions because doctors, it's in and out. But for us, it was like, 50 minutes or whatever you do of intense kind of like interaction with a pandemic and going in your head going, crap, I have the same problem.
Yeah, I think it was one of those times where I really likened it to parenthood in a way, which is you're going through something or you're scared, but you know that you have to stay strong and stay together and keep it together for other people. And I thought in the beginning, I think we all did, that it was going to be 2 weeks. I remember sending my out of office saying, we'll be back in April. And then 2 years later, I was like, I don't think we're going back to the office for a very long time. But I think at that time, just like you said, it was like, I really had no idea what to tell people. And it was so interesting how they looked to us, or at least my clients looked to me and said, what do we do? How do we get through this? And this is so unprecedented. Even our medical community had no idea. Our government leaders had no idea. So it was like, well, how do we know then? There's nothing guiding us. And so I think therapists out of most professions really had to dig deep and not just hold the space, but I mean, really hold steady in a really turbulent ocean that we were going along in. How do we be a floating donut for people while we're potentially drowning too in that same ocean? So it was a really unique time, and I think it still is. And I think it's been exhausting. And I know for our clients it has been, but also for so many of us.
And I joked around with a lot of people during the pandemic, and I still do. I went to Assumption University for my master's, and I don't know, where did you go for your
I
master's?
went to NYU.
I, did you miss the class where they talk about how to handle a pandemic as a therapist? Because I did.
I definitely missed that one. I was
And
fast asleep.
and that's why I gotta tell people, it's like, people like, oh, therapists are so strong and this and that. And like, do you think there was a course on this?
Absolutely. I think the closest I could come was being a trauma therapist and having training in trauma and crisis. And that was to me as close as I can come, since I still think that's where we are. But even then, I mean, we're talking, my training is in like war and that kind of thing, and terrorism and a pandemic which spans the entire globe, and every country was treating it differently, and some places were not, in our country, even thinking there was a pandemic. And so it made it really hard that none of us were seeing the same reality at all times. So I think that tricked us too into saying, like, how do we have training for something, or how do we help people that don't think there's anything going on, or at least some people. So there was that too. It was a really tricky time.
It's interesting because I think about how for 2 years we were very much isolated for the most part. Some people didn't, but for the most part, the world was isolated. Still happening in China, still happening in other countries with the breakouts right now. And one of the things that, I'm a trauma specialist too. I've done trauma work with first responders, the military personnel, correctional staff,
Yeah.
obviously other types of trauma. That's mostly my specialty. A war, you have at least an ally next to you.
Yeah.
Police, you have other officers, or you have, fire come and help you, or there is some sort of interaction. When we have a population that's just isolated and they can't come to common ground, or they can't be even challenging their notions, because you're only going to be going towards the information you want.
Yep.
It creates such a hard silo to break for so many people. I mean, I don't know how you dealt with it, but it was sometimes like listening to some silos. I was like, holy crap.
I tried to avoid it. I think there were times that I really had to put myself on an information diet there. And I live in New York City, so for the most part everybody was on the same page, and when it was 7 p.m., everybody was outside or opening their windows, clapping for the first responders. And it felt like we were all in this community that really was a small community, though we're 9 million people in the city. So it felt okay. And I understood something as being so far away as the other people who didn't know, or who didn't believe, or who didn't follow the rules, or whatever it may be. And I mean, they didn't come into my reality, my actual reality, but I think it was hard for me to really digest that people weren't believing that people were dying. And, I was working with ER docs as a volunteer, and I was watching it myself. And so for people to say that what I saw I wasn't seeing was really like a total mind.
No, I worked with ER docs too, and the reality of hearing my nurses and my doctors plead for like PPE at the beginning and needing the help, and people telling me like, well, no, this isn't real. This is like the common cold. I'm like, I've got nurses breaking down after 2 months. I mean, I have a doctor who's just like so anxiety ridden, not because of necessarily COVID, but all the hard work you got to do and the emergencies, literally emergencies that come in. So I relate to a whole lot of what you said.
Yeah. I'm still kind of wondering if there will be a time that we're all looking at the same reality together, or are those days over? And I think that's also a loss coming from the grief therapist. But I guess we'll find out as time goes on.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you get that question all the time, but people ask me all the time, how do we get to a common ground?
I do.
I have my answer, but since you do, what's your answer?
Oh no, I don't have an answer. I don't have an
I have
answer.
an answer.
I want to hear your answer.
What I usually tell people is that you need to be able to challenge your thought process. And what I mean by that is that, for me, you can talk about politics, you can talk about COVID, you can talk about the war in Ukraine, you can talk about anything. What you need to be able to do is be challenged. And what I mean by that is that when people would say, I don't know if it's real, it's hard for me to challenge the fact that I know people are dying. So that's a hard one to keep, but kind of like being mindful that people are struggling with that reality. And then also realizing that perhaps some of it might be exaggerated. So I do kind of like, okay, what do you mean by it's exaggerated? So let myself be challenged without feeling attacked personally. And I think that when you can accept a little bit of a challenge without feeling it's personal, I think that that's where we're going to get a common ground. I joke around sometimes with friends and even clients. I say, I blame John McCain and Ted Kennedy for this because they're the last two who actually reached out to the middle.
Yeah.
And it's created this divide in politics and belief systems, and we're not that different. And we just need to find that common ground.
I'm with you on that. 100%. Yeah. I mean, and I try really hard to come at it with empathy. I mean, I have a family that has different political beliefs than I do, and it doesn't take away the love. I'm not going to ostracize family members or whatever because of it. I know a lot of people have, and I still feel like there's got to be something. There has to be there's a reason that people believe what they do. And, a lot of it can be fear-based. And I think it's fear-based on both sides, right? So,
I agree wholeheartedly. I think the fear is exactly what the problem is.
yeah. So, although I don't have a great answer, like your answer is actually great. I can allow myself to be challenged, but I also get very, very angry when I read comment sections and things like that, where I'm like, I've got to stop this because people are looking for that confirmation bias, right? They go out and seek things that actually confirm what they believe. So I think when we can stop doing that so much, and people who watch One News America or whatever that is exactly, I can't even remember the name of it, or Fox or whatever, can turn on CNN, or CNN can turn on Fox and really start to see where the divide is, or I think we can sort of know what the divide is at times. But I think if we can hear things, it's going to be having that information sometimes is better than not having it and staying with what we think. I don't know, but coming at it with empathy is always sort of my go-to.
Well, the people who talked a lot about the news that they saw on, and by the way, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, America One, name them all. I don't really care. I tell people like, okay, go for something to the right or left. It doesn't matter. Go to the other one that's right or left. Again, doesn't matter. And go to something like Associated Press or Reuters or something that's more like middle ground.
Yeah.
And then make your own opinion. Don't go with one or the other. Make your own opinion. And I think that that's what we're missing is that we're not willing to kind of like go for our own opinion. We need to fix in a silo in order. I guess we need to all have a sense of belonging. But
I think that's what it is. And I think there are those people that are really in the middle that go for some topics and not for others or whatever. But I think people are afraid to not belong. I think there's a big mob mentality around the world, too. But I also think that I think it's lonely being having your own opinions and having and not having people to say, yeah, they're with us or whatever. I think we're asking people to do something where they've already been isolated now to think for themselves
Right.
or to think, even if people are thinking for themselves, which, I feel like I am, and I do also feel like I belong to a group. But I think it can be hard when people feel isolated and lonely to then sort of stand out in these other ways too.
You already feel you stand out because you're sitting alone because it's a pandemic. So I guess that's the hard part right there.
Exactly. And who knows if it will ever end.
Right. One of the things I also kind of like remind a whole lot of people, let's remind them that we're listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm sitting with Gina Moffa. This is Steve Bisa. Canadian system, even Quebec, where I grew up in Canada, we need to go through 4 philosophy classes in order to get your degree.
Wow.
And it was, we had amazing, maybe I got lucky, but I think a lot of my friends also said the same thing, is that when you start thinking about philosophy as a moral debate, but you can disagree, but not have to fight about it, you are kind of willing to listen to another point of view. And I think that that's the other part about the critical thinking that we kind of lose, because it's okay if I believe that yellow paper is worse than white paper. I don't have any facts for this. I'm just making it up here. But I'm okay if I live with that because I'm not harming anyone. When you start harming people with your thought process or saying things that are nasty to people and all that, I think that that's where the problem lies. And I think philosophy really taught me how to kind of like work through that.
Can you spread that to some American cities, please?
I honestly think that, if we, people talk about this, teachers work hard. I'm not blaming teachers whatsoever. But if we only had, even like in high school, you had 1 or 2 philosophy classes just to kind of like bring that thought process up, I think it would bring so much more willingness to listen to another person.
I completely agree. I really, really do. Well, thank you for that.
Right. Well, now that we've solved the pandemic, we've solved the thought process. There's a lot of solving here. How about you tell me more about yourself? Even though I know you a little bit, but I don't know you really well. So how about you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I am a therapist in private practice in New York City, which I think I did mention. I work with trauma and grief and life transitions, which is, divorce, painful moves, moves where people come to a city and they don't fit in and they're trying to acclimate. Yeah. And I'm writing a book currently with a major
Yay.
publisher here in the States on grief and modernizing it to kind of be where a griever is in these days in the pandemic and post-pandemic. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I'm a Leo and for now, unless you have any other questions.
Oh, I've got plenty of questions. We have unlimited time here.
There you
But
are. I forgot to say I've been a therapist for about 18 years now. Graduated from NYU in 2004 and went straight into trauma trainings and all of that.
well, it's just not fair because we're, again, I graduated in 2003, so we're again very close in our
Are.
experience.
I love it. Did you go straight into trauma as well?
Besides my own, you mean?
Well, yours is the first case study.
Yeah, that was the first case study when I was 12. But well, yes and no. So I worked on a crisis team for since 99 on. I was just a phone person at first, but then I went to evaluations when I got my master's. But I worked on that team for 15 years. So I would say that I did start with trauma, I guess, if I would say that. But I also know that I ended up working in a jail and working with parole and probation and police officers on co-response. They used to be called jail diversion. Now it's a co-response model. So yeah, trauma was kind of like my thing. How
Always
did you get
funny
into that?
when we say that. It's always funny when we say that. I got into it because we had September 11th here in 2001, as the world knows. And at the time, I was writing a paper on terrorism and the psychological aftermath of PTSD. And it felt like a natural path for me in a lot of ways to go into trauma in some capacity. I wasn't sure how it was going to look. So when I went into my MSW program at NYU, inevitably I wound up being really interested in trauma, but also how people respond to trauma, how we're treating it. It was really new at the time. It was the first time even the American people really understood PTSD outside of Vietnam, or war syndrome. So it was really a cutting edge time to be a part of trauma. And there weren't programs really out there for it. So at that time, there was a program at NYU. At the time, it was sponsored by the School of Medicine at NYU. And just a handful of people were accepted to this program. And it was a lot of international trauma stuff. So I happened to be one of those people accepted. And I am so grateful for it because it really opened up my world. There was externships with survivors of torture. And it really, despite the types of people that got to work with, it was really understanding how trauma affects the human condition pretty much irreversibly. And although, and I mean the brain and stuff like that. But yeah, and I wound up working down the road with Holocaust survivors. And that was sort of my backdoor into working with grief, because I don't know a single person who has been traumatized or has lived with trauma who is not grieving something, that before and after. I can't necessarily say 100% of the time those who grieve or have experienced grief have also experienced trauma, but there are more and more, especially since COVID, that I really do believe that many, many griefs at this point are traumatic. And it's really subjective, right? But I do think, yeah, at this point, trauma is a big grieving process. And so that's really how I got into doing more grief work and going into more grief trainings and training.
Well, it's interesting because you kind of answered it, but I think it's a good question to kind of really like work out. What would you say is the huge difference between trauma and grief, and how do you work on it differently?
You know, it's interesting because now I feel like I'm working on it really similarly. But I think with trauma, it's shocking, it's out of the blue. It affects you in a way that affects your nervous system, affects your brain chemistry, parts of your brain. You have flashbacks. I mean, the symptoms are really pervasive. It's not 100% of the time what happens with grief, but it is 100% of the time what happens with trauma. With regard to treatment, trauma treatment, as you know, there are methods. We work with a lot of the physical symptoms and the somatics experiencing. With grief, it depends on what the symptoms are, or what people are coming to me with. But a lot of the time, their story needs to be witnessed, just like trauma. But the story itself and their sharing it and having just their heart be able to talk about their lost loved one is the treatment, and sort of dealing with the symptoms as they come up. But I think people do, for the most part, want to move forward with their person, or or get over their loss, which may be not a person. It might just be a divorce, or it may be the loss of their livelihood, or the loss of their job, or, loss of an identity. And so I think that's more of a processing. I think, as you know, with trauma work, there's a lot that needs to be done, like EMDR or, whatever it may be. A lot of it really is very physical. And with trauma, whatever there is, I like to include a really holistic approach to it. So I don't know if I answered your question completely, but.
No, you did. You actually did. There's so many things that come up for me when you said that, though. I do agree. Like, I am an EMDR practitioner. I think EMDR works great. And I always use the analogy, and I think grief is similar. I just had a similar experience with a client recently where, she had panic attacks and really struggling on a day. And what I kind of tell people is that trauma, and I don't want to put grief in the same package, but it's similar. It's like a mountain. Everybody's willing to circle the mountain, but not a whole lot of people are willing to climb the mountain. And
Yeah.
part of the process of trauma and grief is to climb that mountain. And when you get on top, your work's not done, because going downhill sometimes is even harder than climbing up top. So I hear a lot of people like, oh, I was over my trauma or my grief. I'm like, no, you probably got to the top of the mountain and said, hey, I'm done. No, you got to get to the other side. And you never like solve your trauma. What I tell people is, if you're looking for someone to solve the trauma, I ain't your therapist. I can help you go through your trauma, but I will never get you over or make you forget about your trauma, because that's not the work.
Absolutely. I always say, if you think you're getting a cure for trauma, like, think again. All we can really do is work with the intensity levels. And that's the same with grief. It's like there will always be triggers. And I think that's the hard part. And so many therapists out there are like, I hate the word triggers, but whatever you want to call it, awakenings or re-experiencings, but a trigger, right? Since everyone knows the word,
Right.
they come out of nowhere, and it can be olfactory, it could be memories, whatever it is. And it's working with that to the point where it doesn't intrude upon your life as much, or the intensity level changes. And so whether I'm doing grief work or trauma work, to me, it's always about measuring the level of intensity and not about totally eradicating whatever you've come in here to feel. Because most of the time people don't want to feel bad, right? It's like, yeah, I don't want you to feel bad either, but you have to feel bad.
Right.
You have to feel bad for a while until you feel less bad, and then less bad, and that's sort of kind of how the journey goes. And then sometimes you'll feel bad again for one day or a week or whatever it may be. That is the journey, and that is the healing journey. And the hope is that you just are not going through that alone. And that by the time those times come up that are really hard again, or you're triggered by something and it feels like it's going to knock you down, your work in therapy or your work with your resources have given you the tools to get through that in a different and new way. And that's the hope for it all. Like, that's actually the work. So it doesn't feel as bad as it may be if you've started since day one.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that what my sentence usually is like, oh, you know how many humans I fixed in my career? Zero. Never fixed a person in my life.
Exactly. They're like, well, what are you doing this work for?
Right. And I always answer the same thing. I'm like, I want you to develop the skills. I'm going to give you 14 tools. You can use two of them, you can use one of them, or you can choose none of them. And that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to choose, but you need to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Because I can't do the work. I can give you the tools to help you get through it. But
Yep.
that's how I give the visual.
I love it. I kind of just call myself a traveling companion. We're taking it's much more poetic. It's less like hands-on. Like yours sounds like great. You're like, oh, I'm gonna walk away with tools. Me, I'm like, I'm gonna walk with you on the country roads.
Right. But it's also telling people, like, you also can't take those tools and knock yourself out with them.
Exactly. Fine point. Fine point.
When they tell the tools, I'm like, oh, I'm going to have some people like, oh, yeah, I have all these tools. I'm like, yeah, you're taking the hammer and you're hammering yourself in the head. That's not how that hammer works.
Get a lot of that too.
The hammer goes the other way on something else in order for you to make the hammer efficient.
Yes. I think giving tools and not teaching them how to use it eventually, right? It's like people are going to do what they're going to do with whatever information they have based on their own history of self-sabotage or whatever it may be. And so all we can do is really walk alongside them while they're doing it and show them a different way. But that's the humbling part of this work, is that we don't fix.
Right. And I've also joked around with some of my clients who say, no, I really want to be fixed. I'm like, oh, I'm going to give you some therapists that have the ego to think to fix people. Here's a few names. I don't have that ego.
I'm with you. That's why we're friends.
Yes, we are, because I think we don't fix people.
We don't fix people. And it's humbling work. It's a privilege to be with somebody while they're in the hardest time of their lives, for the most part. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure, to be able to withstand that, even as a therapist, right? To not want to jump in and save, but to allow them to have those experiences. It's really humbling. When it can sometimes feel like at the end of the day, like we're crawling to the edge of our humanity with all of this work, but having the understanding that we're not there to fix, we're not there to cure, we're not there to take away, we're not there to skirt the real work, is the biggest gift that I think we can give. But really to
100%.
simply witness and to give what we know, obviously it's what we're trained to do, but to watch.
One of the things that I can't say I do it every time because I'm not a perfect human being, just like everyone else. But when people have a hard session and they share a lot, at the end of the session, I say, I just want to thank you for trusting me. And people are like, well, you're my therapist. And I'm like, yeah, it's not a given. And don't take that, like you talked about the humility and the humbleness that you have. Again, that's why we're friends. I take it as a huge privilege. And I always tell my clients, thank you. And they're like, so you heard really horrible stuff and you thank me? I'm like, yeah, because that's a privilege. I don't think you told a whole lot of people about that.
Yeah.
So remembering the that stuff is very important. And again, listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, Gina, Steve, one of the things you also mentioned is taking a holistic approach. I'm a Reiki provider and I love Reiki. I also talk about spirituality in my sessions. Yes, we're not supposed to talk about religion, but again, me and supposed tos are not really friends. But I think that embracing some of those holistic spiritual approaches are important. And you mentioned that you do that too. How do you do it in your work?
100%. I think the truth is wisdom in our work is whatever works. It's looking at where that person finds their meaning or has it formerly found their meaning, how they grew up that worked for them or didn't work. I think it's tuning into what their strengths are, tuning into where they navigate. A lot of people found me because I wrote something on my Psychology Today profile a million years ago about taking a more mindful approach. I started meditating, I think it's like 15, 13, 14 years at this point, and it saved me. It really did. I was going through a really terrible time when I started this mindfulness journey with myself. And it really brought me to a new place of being able to sit with difficult emotions. And so it was the first time that it introduced to me that my body plays a part. My body plays a part in all of the way that I feel and all the ways that I can work with the emotions that come up and even control the thoughts, or at least understand the thoughts, or stop the thoughts from becoming feelings, or stop the feelings from becoming, self-sabotaging thoughts or self-destructive thoughts. So that's kind of one way that I look at it. But I have people that are like, I have a moon deck in my office. So people would be like, can I pull a card today? There's some people that want to pull a card and see what comes up. And that interestingly spawns the most, I think, like heartfelt, but helpful information about their history or things that come up that we don't, may not be on the agenda. A long time ago, I was EMDR trained too. So I don't practice EMDR anymore. I can't really, it doesn't work for me to do it remotely. At some
Right.
point, I will go back to doing something like that again. But I think spirituality is such a big part of my life that it's hard for me to hide it. Although if somebody comes to me and they're all science based or whatever, I'm going to go with their belief system. I'm not going to push my own. But if
Right.
somebody comes to me with faith in God, believe me, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to go there because that's what works. It's not our agenda.
The sentence of whatever works is something that I share a whole lot. So I don't know. Maybe we're related in a past life or something.
Possible.
Because whatever works really is resonating. It resonates to a whole lot of people. It resonates as a treater provider as myself, and you do too. There's a lot of things that you brought up there. Whatever works, and I've shared this I think on the podcast. And if I have, just fast forward 30 seconds. If not, I mean, I one day I had a guy who struggled with a lot of alcohol issues, and he was on parole. The parole officer says, we don't know what to do. Don't want to put him in jail. We want to keep him in the community. So yes, parole officers are nice people too. So he came in and he's sitting with me and he looks at my desk and he's like, what's that? I said, there was a small Buddha. I'm like, it's Buddha. Where's Buddha, dude? Talk a little bit about the Buddhist principles and all that. Can I have it? I look at him. I'm like, you going to stay sober? It's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, here. If it keeps you sober, do it. And again, I don't know where this guy is. This is a story from 10, 12 years ago. He stayed sober for the rest of his time.
Oh,
And people are like, what was the treatment? How do you put that in your treatment plan? I said, there's no treatment plan. It worked. I don't really care what works.
yeah. Your transitional object was everything. Sometimes it's what people need. You're absolutely right. I mean, I remember doing like music therapy with people and like pick out the lyrics of the song that is how you feel, whatever it may be. There's no method, there's no training for that. It is just what, part of our job, actually, the biggest part of our jobs is to work on the relationship and to make the relationship itself healing. I think more than any kind of trainings that we have, it is going to be the consistency and validation of our care and support that heals and that helps people through to the other side, to be that template for a really consistent, loving person in their lives that they may never have had. And that's
Again,
everything.
I really feel we're really connected in so many ways. What I tell a lot of my clients too is that part of my job may not, it's not doing CBT and whatever names that we can use. I need to demonstrate what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a professional relationship, but I want to show you what a healthy relationship with good boundaries that are respectful. And most people kind of like resonate, like, yeah, that's why I trust you. There's just not me in this world. There's got to be other people like me out there. So go out there and remember to pay attention to what a healthy relationship may look like. I think that's part of our job too as therapists.
100%. 100%. I'm so glad you're doing it too. It's so nice
Yeah.
you find therapists who are doing what you do and making a difference and helping people just find the love that they may never have gotten. I remember people saying in my social work degree, like, you're not supposed to love your clients. And I can say wholeheartedly, I love every single dang one of them, past and present. And how fortunate,
Right.
how fortunate for me.
And I think that to be truthful, and again, if this is breaking a wall, sorry, but this is the point of finding your way through therapy. I find it a lot more difficult if I don't find something lovable about the client I'm working with.
Yeah.
And if that's breaking a wall, hey, welcome. I'm just an honest guy. And I'm not saying that I reject them. And I try to find something lovable about everyone because I think everyone can have something that's redeemable about them. But I think that to say that we don't love our clients is just we're lying to ourselves if we say that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I love about more modern therapy, that, psychoanalysis and psychotherapy from the Freudian days or more traditional. And a lot of people are coming out of those programs, which can be beneficial for people, right? And I'm not knocking them, but I think that they're so boundaried that they're just a blank canvas. And I think it's not realistic. I think people want to relate to real people so that when they go out into the world, they can believe that real people can care and love them and validate them too, and not just a blank canvas, that they have to imagine in their world. I'm glad that our field has modernized enough to come with the times that we are humans too. And that's sort of what a lot of this podcast is about today is, our own humanity also alongside theirs. And I think that's what makes it a beautiful relationship too.
Right. And I think it's important to be human as a therapist. Sometimes one of the things that people don't eventually they kind of like also relate to it because they sometimes ask me how I'm doing. If I'm having a hard day, I'm like, not so good today. I'll get over it, but that's how I'm feeling. But I don't make it about me, but I kind of mention that if they ask a question, I might give some superficial answer of what's going on. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go into, you know what, my kids and my, yeah, I will talk about just like, tough time with a friend or tough time with, and people relate to that. And then eventually they tell you how they feel because you were honest about how you felt.
Totally.
Again, mimicking that behavior, I think is therapeutic.
I agree. I haven't done that yet. I mostly only if I'm like tired or I'm sick and I've shown up sick to the session because I don't want to cancel. They'll be like, wow, you look bad today or something. And I'm always grateful that they can share how they really feel. tell me, tell me how
Right.
you really feel, and we can find humor in it. But yeah, I think it's so interesting because I remember a time early in my work where I was really, really sick and somebody was like, how are you doing? And I'm like, fine, I'm totally fine. Right. And it turns out that I was about to be septic. I
Jesus.
had a kidney infection and kidney stones that were so bad. And I was in such terrible pain, but I wouldn't cancel. And I was sitting there like, everything's great. Tell me what's going on. And it was like a normal session until I started sweating, and as at the 45-minute mark, I nearly passed out, had to go to the hospital. And the ER docs were like, if you didn't come today, you would have died.
Jesus.
And, because you were really, really sick. And I was like, wow, I can't even believe that. Like, I didn't I wasn't myself, that I just kept putting work first. And, it taught me, now it's like, what was I thinking? Like, I was nothing. I was just like this needless person and nearly lost myself totally.
Right. But I think that we teach ourselves like through, and I'm not bashing my school or your school, any school. You need to be selfless in therapy. And sometimes we misinterpret that as you just show up. Even if you're like almost septic and dying,
Yeah.
you show up.
Yeah.
And how, besides that, obviously that's kind of like a touchstone issue here where you kind of like, oh my God, I can't do that anymore. How do we kind of teach not only, and I think clients sometimes do that too. I don't think it's just therapists. How do we teach people to go, I'm too sick for this? It's okay to miss a session. It's okay not to be there. How do we teach people that?
Yeah, I think continuing to give reminders, right? I think that's what I do on my Instagram most, is give reminders on stuff and permission slips, right? I need them myself. It's okay to sit down and rest. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Like, oh, it's something, it's so stupid, but like we need to hear these things over and over again sometimes before we can believe them or we can take them in. I think consistently saying it's okay to our clients if they need to miss something or they need to take care of themselves or whatever, just over and over, and still showing up as us to show them that there's no punishment and there's no adverse effects from them being them. But I think the flip side is for us to sort of work with the guilt that comes up when we are not there or we need to be human also, which has really been hard. It's been, I
Well,
think my edge right there is how do I still put myself and my self-care when I preach it to so many people? How do I work with my burnout and give myself the time of day to heal so that and fill my own cup so that I can continue to give and not be in energetic deficit all the time? And I think that just being completely transparent, that has been something I've really struggled with, especially since the pandemic.
if it we can't help you, throw it out there. But in mid March, I actually went, like I took a week off for my mental health, and at first I was just telling clients I'm rescheduling, not saying anything about it. And then at the end of the week, I'm like, I'm gonna record something. I may or may not put it on my Instagram, which is still on my Instagram if you want to go to it. But I kind of said, like I'm burnt, and it's not because one client. It's not, oh, John Doe's trauma really got me or Jane Doe's grief process got me. It was just an accumulation of stuff. And I think it's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, pretty quick. And I recorded it, held it, because now I was going through my whole, is the NBCC going to tell me that, and then that's the National Board of Certified Counselors, that you're not supposed to reveal yourself to your clients. You're not supposed to tell them that because they might personalize the attack. And I sat on it. And then on Saturday morning, I'm like, what the hell am I going to lose?
Yeah.
If I do that, the worst thing is that I may two people may not get it, and that's okay. But maybe a lot of people will get it. And when I did put it on there, I was like, it's one of those times where I'm sitting with my phone, looking, I'm waiting for that negative reaction. I didn't get one. All I got is my favorite comment about that, and maybe this helps you. Maybe I'm doing your therapy now. But someone who is a therapist wrote to me and said, you're setting the bar high, Steve. Your honesty and your ability to be yourself and say that I have limits too, and I got to take care of me. You set the standard pretty high for a whole lot of therapists. It wasn't my goal, by the way. I was just trying to be honest and be myself. But I think that we tend to think that where people are going to judge us maybe in a negative light or see us in a different light because of it. If anything, I think that not only do my clients see me in a different light in a good way, I feel therapists do. And people who just follow me have also said, you know what, that's kind of hard to do. And I give you a lot of credit.
I didn't see this for some reason. I got to go check this out.
It would,
I need to share it with everybody far and wide. No, thank you for that because it is true. It is really hard to do that.
I've been back. Obviously, this is going to be released a little later, but I've been back for a few weeks in my office. I've had a few people ask me, "Hey, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm good. I'm here. If I'm not good, I probably won't be here." And I said, "But this session is about you. And I thank you for checking in with me, but this is about you." So I feel like you can be ethical while pushing the boundaries a little bit, and people respect that sincerely more than if. And I don't think you are that way, but some robotic therapists, I know that psychoanalytic stuff, I can talk for a long time because there is good and bad to it,
Yep.
and just like CBT, frankly.
Yep.
But I think that learning to be okay with not being a robot, I think my clients always like to, again, I've been back a few weeks and a lot of them are like, "I'm happy you said that because if I need a break, I feel comfortable telling you." And I'm like, that's it. If that's all I could model for 10 people, then I've made a victory.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
So
And you've modeled it for me.
I hope I did. And the psychoanalytic stuff, it was funny when you mentioned that because I was thinking about, psychoanalytic. I mean, we're past putting cocaine into our patients, which is good. And psychoanalytic stuff, I've fallen in a lot of reading of Carl Jung and the masks and all that. So I embraced that part of psychoanalytic theory a lot better. But one of the things that psychoanalytic does right compared to other treatments, in my opinion, is that you have to be in treatment in order to become a psychoanalytic therapist.
Yeah.
So I just found my therapist finally. I was out of a therapist for 4 months. It took me a long time to find someone. And hopefully, I haven't met him yet. Hopefully, it goes well. But I know that therapy is probably part of what was missing too. And when I was having a struggle, have you ever been in therapy?
Absolutely. I was in therapy, I want to say since like 20 years old, pretty consistently through my 30s.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I took a break when my mom died. And you would think that that would be the time that I would be in therapy, but there was so much I needed to process and I wanted to keep working. I mean, there was so much happening that I just didn't have the time to feel at that particular time. And I knew it would happen, but I wasn't in the place at that point. But, I think you and I talked about it. I am going to go back. I'm going to go back. I think it's really good for therapists to be in therapy every so often. It doesn't have to be constant, but I think checking ourselves, especially during burnout, but also that amount of self-care I haven't done in a while, which is to invest in myself in this way. I'm asking other people to do it, but I'm not doing it. So I'm practicing what I preach. Interestingly, I'm having a bit of a hard time finding someone because I don't want someone in my network. And I don't want, but I'm also,
I relate wholeheartedly.
yeah, but I'm also looking for something really specific at this time in my life, right? I think in different times of my life, I was looking for something different. And this time I'm looking for something with a more spiritual edge to it. So my search continues, but I can't recommend therapy more. And I'm looking forward to when I finally find someone. We'll have to do a part two.
You already stole the words out of my mouth. Not only are we going to do part two for talking about that, we're going to do a part two about your book.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because in my early 20s, even when I got my master's, that's when I started going to therapy. But even there, I was like embarrassed to tell people I was in therapy. How can a therapist be in therapy? And nowadays, I'm like talking about I'm in therapy. I got to go see my mom. Not now, but I will be in therapy. Or when I had a therapist, my therapist kicks my ass on a regular basis in a good way because my last therapist, I'll always share this. I share the story with my clients because I'm very direct, as you figured out. I said my therapist, I went in for 15 minutes and started talking, and after 15 minutes, she's like, "All right, now that you've told me all the therapy bullshit that you knew, how about you tell me about yourself?" And I'm like, "You're my therapist. You understood what I was doing right away."
I love that. I need that person's name immediately. No.
She doesn't practice
Oh,
anymore.
that's
I'd
right.
be
That's
with her
right.
right.
Oh my God. We need to
But
get
yeah,
her
that
back in.
I know, but it's hard. So, but yeah, I think that's what I tell people is that therapy needs to be. The name of my business is actually straight to the point therapy.
I love it.
But I think people don't understand that I can be supportive despite being straight to the point. And showing that two can coexist. Again, we talked about this middle ground at the beginning, and I come back to that, is that you can be supportive of someone while being more direct.
Yeah. I think people appreciate it. I know I appreciate it too, but I think we're at the point now where we really don't have, it doesn't feel like we have the time to beat around the bush.
Between the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and other things that people are going through, I've confessed to first responders that I know that I think we're going to have a very busy summer in a negative way if people can't find that middle ground, because you're already seeing it. I'm not quite up on my New York City information, but I know I've seen it in Chicago, I've seen it in Boston, and
crime is really, really bad here right now.
And I think it's because people don't have, like, we have inflation that's kicking our butt.
Yeah.
And then we have the isolation that we've had for so long and found our self-serving bias with different people, which means that basically we go with what we agree with versus what we don't agree with. And now you got to go in a community and you got to be able to confront people who might not agree with you, or test your boundaries, or test things that you might believe. And I think that people cannot take that dissonance right now.
Agreed. I think it's that. I think there's no resources. There's no mental health services that are enough. So I think people are really desperate, but it also is pretty scary. So everyone just has to constantly be more on alert and watch what's around them. But I think, whether it's now or anytime when you live in a city, it's be alert, the time of like drowning out the world or just listening to your life as a soundtrack is on hold for a while. You're not the main star of the show, right now. So now it's like, just be alert. I think be smart. Anyone who lives in a city of any kind around the world, this is the time to look around you and make sure that you're putting your safety first in this way by being just as aware as you can be. And if you see something, you say something, as they say.
And challenge your narrative.
And challenge your narrative, especially that.
I think I love New York City. Grew up in Montreal, well, South Shore of Montreal, but I say Montreal, it's a lot easier to say. And was in Montreal a lot. I'm fairly far from Boston, but in the Boston area. And when I go to New York City, I just love the city. But even walking through San Diego a few months ago, I did feel the shift. I went to Boston, I felt the shift.
Yeah.
And I think that, I haven't been to New York City. I have to go there soon. I miss the city. You feel a shift in a whole lot of like the feeling, and I don't know how to really describe it otherwise.
It's exactly it. I think people, although interestingly, real estate is through the roof right now, you can't really get anything rental or sales. Everyone's moving in and scooping things up. So it's an interesting separation of the worlds, right? Because real estate is so expensive right now, and yet there's such low inventory because people are coming in and spending that money. And then there's the people who can't afford anything and they're robbing people, and so it's an interesting culture clash of really what's going on in cities right now, and the economic disparity that we really have to continuously look at. But
yeah, I remember walking around Brooklyn years ago, and I went there about 5 years ago for a presentation, and little change, but I was there maybe a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic. The gentrification of Brooklyn is kind of like for someone who only goes every couple of years, it really whoa, it really hits you.
Yeah. And it's a lot like that everywhere, even Harlem and, Washington Heights.
Right.
It's really hard. And, where are people supposed to go? You can't afford your home where you've grown up. It's really scary. So I think it does, in some cases, I'm not saying that's any of these neighborhoods or whatever, but I think it does drive some people to do things to survive.
Yeah, we're not picking on any boroughs in New York.
We're not picking on any boroughs except Staten Island. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. There's amazing people in Staten Island. Just kidding.
The standard is to pick on Jersey or Rhode Island for people in Massachusetts. That's just the standard.
It is. I love it. I love it. And it's our standard to pick on Staten Island, but
Hey, sending
all with
love to
love.
New Jersey and Rhode Island. I'm just kidding.
It's all through love. It's all through love. But no, it's been so good to talk to you about all of this. It's like an old
Yeah.
friend.
And you will be invited again.
I appreciate that. I made it through.
And definitely when your book comes out, I know I won't be your first one, but I definitely want to be in part of the interview process for you because I really look forward to reading your book.
Thank you so much. And likewise, you have a great book out too. So I love that we're both doing this great work together humbly, and that we get to write and use what we know and what we're learning to continue to reach more audiences. So.
And how do people find you? I know you get a lot of calls already, but how do people find you?
They can go to my website if they want to. It's ginamoffa.com, Moffa. And they can find me on Instagram at Gina Moffa, LCSW. Yeah, I mean, that's the easiest way. They could Google me and a whole lot of things come up, articles and podcasts and whatever, maybe this one. And yeah, I'm happy to always talk to anyone who wants to reach out.
Well, I recommend highly your Instagram, obviously. We definitely hope people go and see your work. And, when your book comes out, can't wait to read it and then have a discussion with you.
Thanks, Steve.
The book process is roller coaster.
Yes.
That sometimes you want to get off in the middle, but it's really worthwhile to get to the end.
Well, thank you for that. Since I'm in the beginning, I'm in the hurry up and wait phase.
Yeah, you're going up that little
exactly.
You go up
from the getting an agent to the getting a publisher. Now we're in the wow. There's all of this. Now you actually have to sit down and write. So that's what phase I'm in. So I'll be in touch when I'm in that roller coaster part. When I start to turn upside down, you'll be my first email.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And can't wait to connect again. So thank you.
Likewise. And thanks for everyone for listening and being here with us.
Well, this concludes episode 46 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Gina Moffa, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was a great interview. I hope that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. In the next episode, and actually the next 2 episodes, we will be talking to Jen Nakai. We're going to be talking about the COVID pandemic, how it affected people, how it's affected our thought process, how it affects a lot of different things in our lives right now. So I hope that you join me for that episode. Please like, subscribe, or follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for information, educational, and entertainment purposes. If you are struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor or therapist for consultation.